Hello and welcome to All You Can Board. I'm Carlo and today I'm going to be previewing a new game called Trailblazers, which is on Kickstarter right now as of Tuesday, August 16th. So this is a game designed by Ryan Courtney with artwork from Seth Lucas, and this is published by Bitewing Games. So Bitewing Games is a fairly new up-and-coming publisher. I don't believe they have any games currently out in retail yet, but they've had a couple of exciting Kickstarter campaigns for other games over the past year or two, and you should expect to see plenty of games coming out by them officially within the next little while. Lots of exciting stuff from them. Before we get into it, I will just let you know right now that this is, of course, a prototype version of the game. So while some of these components, some of these might not be prototype quality because some of them are already really nice, like some screen printed, engraved meeples and stuff like that. But just keep in mind that anything here is subject to change for the final version. And the other thing I want to mention is that this is a paid preview. So we were contacted by Bitewing Games to put together this preview, and we are being paid for it. So for that reason, we are going to try to leave our opinion out of this entirely. This is not a review by any means. This is sort of just an informative look at the game. I'm going to try and be as thorough as I can to look at, give you an overview of how the game plays. We'll talk a little bit about the 2 optional expansions that are available through the campaign. We'll talk about the solo mode, and then near the end I'll talk just about some of the mechanics in a little more detail, and then we'll just kind of end off on talking about why this game may or may not be for you, so that ultimately you can make the decision rather than having me tell you whether this game is for you. So I will just mention before we go any further that Ryan Courtney, for those who might not be familiar, is the same designer of Pipeline, which I have not actually yet played, and he has also designed Curious Cargo, which I have played. And Trailblazers basically, takes something very familiar from those other 2 games, namely the connecting of the pipes, the kind of route building stuff, and then just takes a different theme here and repurposes that kind of mechanism in where it's the main focus of the game. So, with that out of the way, let's get right into it. So basically this plays from 1 to 8 players, so yes, there is a solo mode, and it plays in about half an hour regardless of player count, and that's because the game is always going to play over 4 rounds regardless of player count, and every round there's always going to be 3 turns per player, but you're doing things simultaneously, so regardless of player count, the game should be about the same length. So the way it's going to work is you have this big deck of cards that have different trails on them, of different colors. So there's red trails, which are biking, brown trails, which are hiking, and blue, which are kayaking. And there's cards that just have all kinds of different combinations of, they bend and twist in different ways. Some cards have, only red trails. Other ones have 2 or 3 different colors mixed in. So either way, you're going to deal 8 cards to every player at the start of the round. Everyone will pick up their 8-card hand, and you'll start by drafting 2 of those cards. So you'll pick 2. Let's say I pick these 2. And then I pass the other 6 remaining cards to my left. Once everyone has picked their cards, we all flip over our 2 cards, and we place these in our little personal trail area. We're all building our own area. There's no central area that we're, fighting over or anything like that. So you'll place your cards. They can either go next to each other, they can overlap in different ways, they can connect next to, you can't cover your camp cards, which I'm going to talk about in a moment as well. But basically you're going to be taking those cards, passing, and then you're going to pick up the 6 that got passed to you, and then you're going to do the same thing with those new 6 cards. You're going to pick 2 of them, put them down, pass them. We're going to do that, and then when we have 4 cards, pick 2, pass them, and then when you get the last 2 cards that someone passed to you, those just get discarded. So you're basically playing 3 turns where you place 2 cards each turn, and then at the end of that you're discarding the last 2 cards you get, and then that'll be the end of the round. But at the start of the game, each player also has these 3 camp cards. So they're base camp cards. There's 1 for hiking, 1 for kayaking, and 1 for biking. So at the start of the round, when you get dealt those 8 cards, the first thing you're actually going to do when you look at those 8 is you're going to pick one of those 3 camp cards and put it in play in front of you, and then you're going to go through the round where you're acquiring the cards and placing them. So when you place those cards, you can either place them next to other trail cards, you can overlap trail cards so that they cover and connect in different ways. The types of trail don't have to line up. You can have a kayaking trail run right into a hiking trail. It's just going to affect the way that you're going to be limited to score later on. Or you can put them adjacent to camp cards, but unlike laying them over top trail cards, you can't lay trail cards over top the camp cards. They can only go beside so that the routes kind of line up with the outer perimeter of these camp cards. So at the start of the second round, you'll place your second camp somewhere on the board connecting to something else, and then you'll draft again, play the second round, third round that way. In the 4th round, you won't have any camps left, so in the 4th round, you're just going to do those 3 turns of drafting from the 8-card hand down until you play those last couple cards, and then you're going to do final scoring. Throughout the game, there's going to be, so at the start of the game, depending on player count, you're going to shuffle up and draw randomly some in-game scoring cards and end-game scoring cards. And so, for example, I'll show you what in-game scoring cards could look like. So, for example, they'll have a couple of numbers here for the points that they award based on how quickly they get completed. So, at the end of any player's turn, if you have met one of the in-game goals and you've already achieved it, you would then basically take one of your little player cards and you would tuck it behind the highest number available. So if I was the first player to complete this goal, I would be doing this, and this is going to indicate that at the end of the game I'm going to get 6 points for it. The next player to complete that goal would get 3 points, for example. If 2 players complete it at the end of the same turn, they're both going to get, they'll both put their player card in the same spot and both get that number of points. So, for example, this one is encircle both the hiking and biking camp with a single kayaking loop. So you're looking at here, this is how a loop can be completed by having your route start and end on the same type of camp. So in this case, we have a blue kayaking trail that starts on one side and ends on another part of the kayaking base camp. So that's going to count as a completed loop, which is one of the main ways you score points in the game. And this is saying that if you can encircle the other 2 camp cards, that you're going to get 6 points for that. There's all kinds of variety, and this one is just, 4 hiking loops. So it's specifically the brown hiking base camp. If you can get 4 completed loops into that camp, then you achieve that. So that's a couple examples of those. The end game scoring ones are more of like something you have to achieve, or sometimes you're competing with the other players. So for example, there's this one called Forever Float, and these you only check these at the very end of the game basically. But this one is longest single kayaking loop. So you're just comparing with the other players to see who has the longest actual completed loop. That player will get 6 points, the next longest would get 3, so on. This one's most uncovered trail cards that display animals. We haven't talked about animals yet because they don't have a whole lot of involvement in the base game, but there's, they tie into the expansions quite a bit, but there is a card here that actually plays off of them. So those are some of the things you're going to be doing throughout the game. The only ways you score points, other than the in-game and end-game scoring cards, are for completed loops. So you could have a trail that is, let's say, 12 spaces long, and you determine it by the trail markers, which are the little, spots along the trail, like little bridges and things like that, packs of bushes or whatnot. You could have a really long trail, but if it's one spot away from linking back and closing that loop, it's going to be worth 0 points. It could be that once you close it, maybe now it's worth 12 points, but it's all about kind of trying to complete that loop, complete that project that you start to get those points. Otherwise, you're going to get nothing for it. And that's the only way you score points in this game: completed loops and the in-game and end-game goals. That's pretty much how you play Trailblazers. So during the campaign, there's also going to be, there's different types of options for how you can back the game. There's the Travel Edition, there's the Standard Edition, and the Deluxe Edition. Obviously, we're filming this before the campaign goes live, so there could be other, options available. But as far as I know, that's the extent of it as of now. And there are 2 expansions so far that are available through this campaign, and we'll talk about those real quick. So first off, we're going to talk about the Animals expansion, which is what these tokens here are for. This is an optional modular one that you can just choose to whether you want to add it in or not, but it doesn't really change the base rules of the game by a whole lot. It just adds the fact that when you place a card, because not all the cards have animals, as I showed you before, some of them do, and there's 6 different types of animals. If you place a card on your little play area that has an animal pictured on it, you take a token of that matching type and you would place it on the card on your trail, and it counts as an additional trail marker. And then at the end of the game, when you're doing your regular scoring, for your completed loops that you're scoring per trail card, you're also now scoring points per unique animal. So to a maximum of, if you get all 6, one of each of these 6 animals out on your trail, you're going to score the maximum points. And it goes up exponentially. It's something like, 1 animal for 1 point, 2 unique animals for 3 points. I think once you get a third one, it goes up to 6 or 7. So you're really incentivized to try and get as many of these unique animal types as you can on each of your completed trails. It's just another level, added level of challenge. And it also adds a bit of nuance to the drafting, because rather than just drafting based on the trails, now you have to consider the animals on the cards. And even when you're passing, you're thinking which animals are left in this hand of cards that I'm going to be passing to the other players, and so on. So it adds a bit more to the decision space there, and just gives you a bit more of a challenge to work towards with having to, get these unique animals along that trail. And again, it's just totally modular. So that's basically the extent of that expansion. The other one is a much more complex and involved one that changes the rules more, and it's called the Adventurer expansion. So the way this one works is you are actually removing the goal cards. You're not playing with them at all, but you are playing with the animals automatically when you do the adventure mode. And so at the end of the second round, so there's going to be these tokens, like a biker token, hiker, and kayaker, and then there's also these campfire tokens. So at the end of the second round, once you've already placed your second camp, you're going to take 2 of these tokens. Let's say the camps I placed, let's say in the first round I played my hiking one, and let's say in the second round I played my biking camp. And, you know, obviously this isn't how the layout of the board would look exactly, but the way it would work after that second round is the camp that I didn't place now gets removed from the game, so I won't be able to place this kayaking one. The kayaking token won't come into play, but I will take 1 each of the biker token and the hiker token and basically put them on those camps or the trails that I'm building out from those camps. And then on subsequent turns, you're going to move these tokens along the respective trails matching that color and type, and they're going to try to move 3 trail markers ahead at the end of every turn. If ever they're not able to move 3, either because the trail ends or something happens, they're basically going to lie down and have a campfire. They're going to camp for the rest of the round. So that means on the future turns, let's say on the first round you only moved 1 space, you camp. Now on your second and third turn where you're placing cards, your adventurer can't move anymore along the trail. So you're always trying to have enough of the trail set up ahead that your adventurers can move. And this expansion is basically sending your adventurers along the trail rather than just building trails as you go. So it's a lot more puzzly, a lot more difficult. It's very, like, you have to make sure you really maximize those routes and the timing, and, you know, looking ahead at, is there enough space for my adventurer to get far enough away? And the other thing is that if they come across animals that you've put down, they'll stop to take pictures of those animals. If they manage to get to the end of the round, like if you have to camp early, you're going to lay your campfire token down, which is going to be worth fewer points at the end of the game, whereas if you manage to actually move every turn and then camp just at the end of the round, your campfire token will stay up, which is going to get you bonus points for actually the fact that you were traveling throughout the whole round kind of thing. So it's very tricky. Again, it adds a lot of kind of like thinkiness to the game, but in a good way, and it gives you enough of a different approach to the game that, there's some interesting stuff to look at there in the adventure expansion. Now let's talk about the solo mode. So again, I mentioned the game can be played solo, and it works in a very similar way in terms of the drafting. Instead of drafting and then passing, you're basically going to, after you start with your initial 8 cards, you pick 2, and then you're going to discard the other 6, and then you're going to draw that same number that you just discarded, you're going to draw from the deck. So now you would draw 6 new cards from the deck, kind of to simulate having those passed from another player, and then you're going to pick 2 from those, discard the other 4, then you'll draw 4 from the deck, same thing. So you're going to play out the same game, like 4 rounds, 3 turns per round, you're placing 2 cards, everything is the same, it's just the way that you discard the cards instead of passing them, and then you draw new ones instead of acquiring from the player to your left. But that's pretty much it in terms of playing the standard solo mode. But there's going to be different, varying difficulty levels. So there is Tenderfoot, Voyager, and Blazer. So you're basically going to be trying to get a target number of points at the end of the game. There's going to be different achievements along the way that you can do, whether it's really focusing on getting a lot of closed loops, or getting your like hiking tokens a certain way. There's all kinds of different achievements and ways that you can play around with the solo mode and change what you're going for. And you can also play the adventurer mode that I explained solo, which is when I mentioned these tokens. Some of the achievements factor in the tokens from the adventurer mode and that kind of thing. There's also an epic solo mode that says it takes 30 to 90 minutes that involves the animal scoring, and you're really just scoring for the animal points on your longest completed trails, so it shifts the focus a little more to really, really focus on the animals, and then you can't get points from other ways, so you really have to make that a priority in the solo game. What else is there? There's bonus stages. Once you beat the epic solo mode, there's 2 different bonus stages that you unlock. One called Springer Fever, another called Triple Crown. So there's so much replay value just even in the solo version, and the fact that you're not learning its own separate game with separate rules or managing a bot makes it fairly easy to just, like, whether you want to learn it solo first to then show people, or you just want to be able to practice or play for fun on your own time. There's definitely a lot of value there for the solo mode and a lot of options. So the travel version I just want to touch on very briefly because there is this little pouch here that comes with the game, and the travel version is going to have different meeples and components that will be able to fit in this. So just if you're wondering, like, just compared to the size of my hand, like, this is a very small travel pouch, and it's pretty awesome that a game that normally fits in a box this size can actually fit in something like this as a travel game. And I could see it making a great travel game because you're just laying cards. Makes a good solo activity, and because of the sort of variety and player count, it gives you a lot of options. So now some of the aspects of the game I just want to talk about in a little more detail here. So the goal cards and the scoring is something I wanted to touch on because in some ways it's forgiving and it's unforgiving, because this isn't a game where, there's a lot of games in board gaming where it's kind of point salad, where every turn you're getting points, or you do this, get a point here, get a couple points there, and you're always trying to figure out where can I get more points, or you're comparing your choices. In this game, no points are guaranteed. You could honestly play the entire game and end up with 0 points, because other than the in-game and end-game scoring goals, again, if you don't meet those, then your only points are going to come from closing loops. But the more ambitious you are, the bigger the loop is, the more trail markers, the more points. But again, if you could be 95% done this loop of 15 cards, this massive potential, and maybe if you got it completed, it would be 16 points, but because you didn't complete it, you get 0 instead. So it's a lot of kind of, you're investing in these long-term goals, and once you get them, they give you a big chunk of points, rather than just kind of grabbing little bits of points along the way. So I say forgiving and unforgiving because, again, if you fall short of your goal, or you feel you didn't see the cards you needed to complete your trail, you might fall short and score 0 for a project you spent a while working on. But at the same time, they give you multiple different ways to go about scoring goals. And if something isn't working, you can say, well, I'm going to try going for this in-game goal instead, or this end-game type goal. So it allows you to pivot, but again, you do have to invest and really commit to things to score well in this game. As far as the drafting goes, so I want to compare this to some other drafting games. Let's talk about something like Seven Wonders, just in terms of a drafting game that a lot of people have played, one of the most popular ones out there. So in a game like Seven Wonders, when you're drafting, the card types each have their own color. Like there's gold cards, there's red cards, which are military, there's the green, science cards and things like that. So when you're passing cards, it's sometimes easy to remember what was the ability, or have I been passing a lot of military cards, or have I been passing these types of cards. In this game, I find it's a little more difficult to keep track, or even when you're looking through the cards and you're like, oh, this is a good one, this is a good one, and you'll look at your map and think, okay, this could go there, and then maybe by the time you've narrowed it down to 3 or 4 choices, you go back and you look and think, wait, I remember I kind of wanted this card, this was a good one, but why was it again? Where was I going to put it? So it's not as quick or as intuitive to kind of look at a card and be reminded of where it could go for you, or what it's used for. Or even when you're going to pass those 6 cards or pass those 4 cards, it's not always as easy to remember what you're passing, or what may or may not come around, or what you may or may not be giving to an opponent, because the cards don't have as many unique distinguishing features, right? It's all kinds of different combinations of trail cards. Like, am I going to remember that I passed, however many cards that had red on them, or that this card had red and blue and brown trails, like all the different types of trails. So it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just something to keep in mind, that the drafting feels a little more maybe nebulous when you're placing importance on which cards you want to keep or pass. So just keep that in mind if that factors into your decision at all. Player interaction is relatively low in this game, but I think for when you're playing this type of game where it's a very puzzly, very spatial awareness kind of thing, you don't want people being able to come mess around with your board. But it still makes you keep track of what, not makes you, but it definitely helps to keep track of what other people are doing, because, again, if other players are going to beat you to those end game goals, they're going to lock in the 6-point value or the 3-point value or whatever before you get there. You're going to score fewer points than them. And also, when it comes to drafting, the better you get at the game, the more you play it, you are going to kind of get a better hold on the drafting and what you can hold on to, or what you can pass and that sort of thing. And so the interaction comes more from racing to the in-game goals, competing for the end game goals, and then a bit of what you are or aren't passing to your opponents. So that's mostly the extent of the player interaction in the game, which is probably ideal for this type of game anyway. Replay value, again, I've gone over kind of the different aspects of not only, like, yes, you are doing the same thing every game, but because you have a different combination of in-game and end-game scoring goals, and even if you just reset up the game with the exact same goals out there, you could go for a different goal this time, or you can try to place a bigger emphasis on having bigger loops, or if you're playing with the expansion, you can try and go more for animals or whatnot. So even though the core loop and the core goals and the kind of what you're trying to accomplish feels similar from game to game, they're giving you different options to keep things feeling hopefully fresh from game to game. And again, there's all kinds of options with solo modes and expansions and achievements that you can go for, and even just the variety of player count goes a long way, obviously. There's minimal downtime in the game, as I said. Even with 8 players, the only way really that it would take longer with more players is if you're always waiting for that 1 or 2 players to pick their cards. If everyone else is drafted and is waiting, you might sometimes be waiting for the player, but otherwise the game is probably going to be pretty smooth, pretty snappy, regardless of how many players you have. And the last thing I want to talk about is just the ease of teach and play. Fantastic rule book, really straightforward, only a few pages. This is a super easy game to teach anyone basically. And if you have played those games like Pipeline and Curious Cargo, again, I've not played Pipeline, but this is absolutely a much simpler, easier game to get into than either of those games, while again preserving that main aspect of the route building and connecting and being able to lay over cards and change the way that routes are going and that sort of thing. So, is this game for you? Well, if you like puzzly spatial games with route building and that type of thing, I want to compare quickly to a game Sprawlopolis. Like if you're into that type of thing, or if you liked Curious Cargo, Pipeline, those kinds of games, and you're looking for something like that, then I think you'll really like this game. There's a lot to offer. Like if you're into this type of game, the amount of options there are and the replay value and how much stuff comes in the box, there's a good chance that you're going to really like this game, and there's a good chance that you're going to feel like you got your money's worth just because of, again, how much sort of replay value comes in the box. If you normally don't like these types of games, if you don't like polyomino games, tile laying games, spatial games where you're sort of being left alone with your own player area and the player interaction is fairly low, if you're not normally crazy about those games, or games like if you didn't like Curious Cargo or Pipeline, this probably isn't going to change your mind. I wouldn't say there's enough different about it that sets it apart enough from those, other than the main fact being that they've basically streamlined it and made it more approachable, more accessible, and they've also widened the player count to 1 to 8 players and shortened the playtime right down to 30 minutes. So if you played, or you thought you maybe knew someone, you have a regular gaming partner or people in your gaming group who might have liked games like Curious Cargo and Pipeline, but you thought they're just too much, this might be a good alternative. But again, if you've played relatively light puzzly games before, route building games and stuff, I don't know if this is going to do enough to change your mind to be worth backing. But either way, I hope this video has been helpful to you. Please let me know in the comments below if you have any questions at all about this. I'll do my best to answer them as soon as I can. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and keep in mind that, again, this was just a prototype version of the game. But otherwise, yeah, thank you so much as always, and we'll see you next time.